Leading from inside the team, whilst you are also very much still part of that team and working within it, is really hard, especially when growth starts to stall or performance falters and something's got to change. Under pressure, teams don't struggle because people aren't trying. The struggle comes from misalignment or the team not fully gelling or no longer being clear on what mission they're working. In this episode of the Business Emergency Room, we talk about people dynamics, we talk about decision making, we talk about team performance and the leadership therein, and specifically what business leaders can learn from high-stakes environments like the Marines, where the squad leader is very much part of and working within the unit, and where alignment, trust, and mission clarity are essential to mission success and the safety of the team. Leadership today isn't just about scaling. It's about navigating constant uncertainty, market disruptions, and high-pressure decisions. If you're dealing with chaos, bottlenecks, and relentless pressure, welcome to the Business Emergency Room. Hey, thanks for tuning in. I'm glad you're here. We are going to talk about people and people dynamics today. I have a fun guest because I think he has lots of interesting stuff to say about people dynamics, but also about decision-making in high-pressure environments, not coming at it like me from the disaster recovery or sailing background, but from a marine background. He spent a whole bunch of his career in Fortune 500 companies and with Fortune 500 companies in sales. I mistakenly thought he was a numbers guy who made it into people dynamics. He's not really. He was selling numbers people. He's really a sales guy. That makes much more sense, right? So yeah, we are going to talk about leadership and growth. And my guest specifically works with smaller units. But yeah, very interesting context, interesting experience. John, I'm really glad you're here. John Belleau from Belleau Coaching. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Maartje.
So let's get into it by maybe painting a little bit the landscape in which you operate. You say you work with small unit teams that are in growth. So what are kind of the scenarios that you get called in for, and what are kind of the journeys that you take these teams on typically?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I appreciate you asking. So and I get this question a lot. Maybe I should change it. I don't really know. I call it small unit leadership and small unit teams. What that really means is that I primarily work with leaders and teams that are still doing the work. It's no better way to put that. So I think of like, my background, a financial advisor who's still continuously financial advising his clients, but also having to run an admin staff and maybe an investment specialist or insurance specialist, et cetera. Same thing with like real estate's another common one, or attorneys. Construction, I do a lot of work in the trades areas as well. And really why and when people hire me is when they hit either a growth or a personnel obstacle that feels a little bit too challenging, or they don't know really where to go. Or quite frankly, as it happens with many top performing salespeople, they get to a point where they get into a director level position and they were the top salesperson or they've been in sales forever. And this director position looks great, grand and wonderful, but it ends up being a totally different monster than they were anticipating. And so we end up working a lot about a leadership and how to be a leader, and still, again, actively practicing inside of their business, even if they have transferred into a director role.
So what I'm hearing is that in your situation, you get invited in because people have somewhat self-diagnosed that there is some challenges in the people dynamic space that are getting in the way of growth. I also hear you allude to something that I learned as the Peter principle, right? Which is not entirely the same, but similar, right? And the Peter principle is about that if somebody's really effective in their job and in their specialty, they get promoted. And the challenge is at some point they get promoted into a next role that suddenly needs a skill set that really isn't theirs.
They don't have it.
And that very functional person somehow becomes somewhat infunctional in the next role.
Yeah.
I hear the challenge around the small units, and when I first read that, I'm like, oh, what does that mean? Is that then also small companies? And to me, I know some very, very large companies where I would say the leader is still very much in the business, right? So I could see how that definition could be a tricky thing.
I've got to change it. Yeah, I do.
No, I'm not saying you do, but I'm glad that you clarified that, because I think suddenly the self-selection in becomes infinitely bigger, because that's so relatable, right? So let's start with that example where you finished, right? Or where people are growing and the business is growing and people are growing through their roles, and suddenly that leadership remit becomes so much bigger. What, from where you sit, are some of the biggest things that trip people up? What's the kind of transitions or things that change in these roles that make somebody who's very good in their own discipline and their own function? Is it just simply the span of control, or is there other things that you see time and time again happening that if those get added to responsibility, or if those change, that's where it's a step change?
Yeah, I think the two things, it's an awesome question. I think the two things that I notice with especially salespeople that have, because look, that's a lot of times what it is, right? Someone's really high performing in sales, like, hey, you should be a director, or you should be the sales manager now. And I'll have to look up that Peter Principle. I've never heard that before, but it exactly describes this. So obviously that's what it's for. But what I noticed, the first and foremost, is that leadership at its core is not about you. And being the top sales performer generally is about you.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, so that's others first, right? If you go into that leadership, one of the bigger issues sometimes is they have to put your people first. And that translates out over into recognition as well, right? When you interview top performers or A-level players, recognition always ranks in the top 5 things they truly care about at work. In leadership, oftentimes the best leaders you've never heard of, including myself and my own examples, all the best leaders that I've ever met in person, they don't have books. They're quiet professionals, right? They do what's necessary, and their teams, their units speak for their leadership, right? And I think, look, it's not to say that the great leaders of the world shouldn't get recognized. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that that's generally speaking the number one thing, those two things, 1 and 2, that they struggle with immediately, that we have to get over that obstacle of understanding the leadership is no longer, like, this isn't about you anymore. And that's going to translate into recognition as well, a lot of times.
Yeah. And I used to work for a company where we had this leadership program that was forever unchanged, and it had planets, but one of the planets was called delivering results through others, right? And it was very much about that. And yes, if you are the top sales leader in a sales team, you're also doing that, right? Because there is, but it's in a space, and overall the results of the sales team are also your results. And now if you're taking it to a different platform where the results are more integrated, right? The results that you are now responsible for, the integrated results between sales and, purchasing, maybe, right? The actual cost of the sales that are made and the net results. That's a different integrated ball game. And where the people dynamics become also infinitely more intriguing. If we talk about teams as a whole, or larger groups of people, why is it that your clients tend to come to you and say, hey, it's a people issue? Or why is it a people issue that gets in the way of growth? And is it really a people issue, or is it typically much more than that?
It's usually much more than that. As you know, yes. It's typically much more than that. It's always kind of where it starts. It's like a revenue issue, or or a people issue. And when you start really digging deeper, it's much more than that, right? Oftentimes, weirdly, it kind of translates all the way back down to a vision issue a lot of times, where there isn't a clear vision. The team doesn't know what the end goal is and why they're bought into this. It's just hey, I'm here doing this thing. And if you really want real buy-in, you got to start right at the foundation, right? So one of the things that even as a coach that I do is I send a bunch of business and teaming assessments that I've made to them and say, hey, fill these out. Not like a Myers-Briggs or something like that or a DISC, but just very real down and dirty about their business. But I have everybody fill those out, not just the leader, right? And say, hey, where does your entire team think the communication's at? Where does your entire team think the production, right? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Team dynamics. What are your team members' visions? Have you ever even asked? And because I think this is really interesting to me. Got to it on this rabbit hole, but when we think of teams, that's a predication for a good team. I'm from upstate New York, so like the Bills just lost their playoff game, and people are upset, whatever. But everybody in that Bills organization, it's probably, or any football team's organization, they want to win. At the very minimum, they've got this vision for winning the game, right? Nobody's walking on that field and be like, I hope we lose today. Right. So it's this very, very small thing that we take for granted a lot of times in corporate America, right? But it needs to happen. If you ask every single player on a professional sports team, they all have a basic understanding of why they're there and what their job is to do.
How they
when you tour organizations, that's often not the case.
No, and of course, I love that you start with your form of diagnostics. As we were talking, I was also thinking, because people ask me that a lot, right? So you talk about self-diagnosis, right? And people come to you and say, hey, I think it's a people thing, but it's typically something else, right? And I'm like, go ahead, right? Diagnose whatever. What I more care about is that you actually recognize that whatever you're doing isn't entirely right, and that you or is not doing what it's supposed to do, right? Right is also right, and wrong is also such harsh words, and that you're inviting in a fresh pair of ears and eyes. And as long as people like you and me don't play bluff poker with what we're good at and what we truly know, it doesn't really matter if you start with John or if you start with Maartje, because you'll bring in a fresh pair of eyes and we will help you diagnose and make transparent and visible some of what's going on. And a lot of that is, laying bare the misalignment, right? And understanding is in our realities and where we're going, how we fit into that. And as long as we're then willing to also admit, well, and now we're reaching a point where I think you need a different kind of help. I don't think you can start in too wrong a place, right? It's not, and it's seldom one thing, and it's seldom the first thing you see. You talk about misalignment in visions and direction, and to me that relates typically then directly back to empowerment. I'm assuming great work. That's something you work with all the time, but it's also one of these subjects that has many definitions and many tools and tricks. What for you makes people in a work, what are some of the criteria for you that you see that make people in teams feel empowered or in organizations feel empowered to give their best and do their best?
Yeah, great question. So there's two things. One is this word that keeps getting brought up, not in our conversation, but around me, is this authenticity word, where we have to make sure that our team members feel like they can be their authentic selves, because if they keep feeling that they're hiding who they are or how they perform, it's a mental barrier that it's a larger one than we understand, truthfully, right? I was years and years of my life. That's how I felt, quite frankly, was that I was putting on this suit, right? That just really wasn't me in a lot of senses of the world. I was good at it, but it just really wasn't me, and it wasn't truthful to my authentic self. And when I broke free from that myself, I started to soar. And I thought to myself, man, authenticity really is a lot more important in the workplace than I ever really imagined, even in just my own example. And working with organizations, it became very, very apparent as well, and especially small teams, that the more we can empower people to be their authentic selves and how they work, right, you're going to get better results. They're going to be happier, because they're going to be working and living a life of fulfillment that is based in their authentic self as well. Yeah. And the other thing I would say too, and one of the tools that I use, that you and I were talking before about tools and tricks, and is I like to call it building your performance blueprint. And what that really goes into is a comment I made before of this empowerment of like, if we all knew on the team how we all performed at our best, regardless of our station in the team or in the company, we would all thrive. It happens like that. And so when I talk about building your professional blueprint, what I'm talking about is understanding you and your team's purpose. Not only your purpose for being business, but their purpose for being, right? That Japanese saying ikigai, right? The reason for being. Then you've got your vision, which we talked about before. I think everybody should know what ecosystem or environment they thrive in. Then everybody needs to know what motivates them and motivates the people around them. You know, how often have you and I probably seen leaders in organizations go up to people and just talk to them exactly the wrong way, surround them with people that don't support or that they thrive under, or situations, and don't get off on the type of motivation or corporate motivation that's being shoved down their throats, right? We used to call it, in the Marine Corps, we used to call it mandatory fun time, right? Yeah. Nobody really wanted to be there, but we were there.
Yeah. And I love the term performance blueprint. That's such a, I think, a very, very useful label to put on that and say, hey, we need to put some. I talk a lot about how even with the best intentions, we can, as individuals, leave a meeting and feel that we are aligned on what actions to take, and yet still have very different versions of what that reality looks like. Yeah. And so anything or any tool or process that invites continued engagement and conversation to, on the one hand, you don't want everybody's reality to be cookie cutter, but on the critical things, you want people to live in the same reality to deliver better results. Yeah. On the authenticity side, authenticity is, I think, a good word in that space, but it's also so often, and definitely you use in your business and in your work context too, a lot. I saw that I think it's sometimes such an overused word, right? So I also sometimes talk about agency. It's like this idea that it's not just it. If I believe in the workplace that that there is a right way and a wrong way to show up, or a right way or a wrong way to do certain work or to answer a question, whenever you ask me to do something, I will first start to self-filter by, but they probably want this and assume all sorts of things and limit the space from which I respond. Whilst if you tell me, I'm trying to get here and I also don't know how to go about it, I'm starting to think like, okay, what do I have, or what do I know, or what can I do from my own agency to help in that quest to get there, right? So it's I often think of it in the restrictions. You just alluded already a little bit to your time in the Marines and your time as a Marine squad leader. In itself, that sounds like an environment where there's a lot of rigidity in the system as to how you're supposed to be and how you're supposed to operate. Yet it's also entirely set up to function in emerging situation, to deal with change, to deal with the unexpected. Can you tell me a little bit what of the principles and experience thereout you take into your day-to-day work with companies and businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Marine Corps leadership is misunderstood in a lot of ways. I think the Marine Corps itself is rigid. And there are a lot of, it is. If you want to be a really good leader though, it's not what you see on the movies from the Marine Corps where it's everyone screaming and yelling and the boot camp thing. And yeah, that does happen. I'm not going to say that it doesn't, but I think what really stuck out to me was, in order to be a great leader, you have to really understand your people. You have to be bought into a mission that you're all focused in on. You have this deep desire and purpose, and there's a structure to it. There is hierarchy to it. But the best leaders that I learned from are open to suggestions and are open to other people's ideas, because at the end of the day, it's all about mission success. And I think that's one of the things that when you look at like really tight organizations, including the Marines, take any other specialized branch, or really anything in the military, you're all bought into this one thing that it's mission, right? Like you're all there for a reason. You all want to go home, right? You're all kind of suffering through it. And there's this unbreakable brotherhood and bond that you create. And with organizations, that becomes really, really challenging, because I don't think that they do a good enough job, really at all, of creating anything like that, and that's why I think I really started getting down into like the small unit team leads, because that's much more obtainable. And you see so much better progress when you work on those small units of building something really close together and being really bought into this mission, and I think that's a piece of it. And it's not about like, I call it firm but fair, right? As a leader, I think you need to be firm, but also fair. So firm, but also empathetic. You do have to have this structure. It can't just be, just go do whatever you want. No, there has to be that level of respect. There has to, in my opinion, there has to be some level of hierarchy as well, to create the structure that people then can thrive in this, what I call like a bookend. Like, hey, if we've got, beginning of the day, end of the day, here's your mission brief, right? And then go complete it, and then have your after action report, as I call it. It's massively helpful for a lot of teams. And so I think it's that joint quality of having like a good structure, a good hierarchy, but then also be open to, hey, if I'm hiring, if I'm what I call selecting the right people to be a part of my organization or my team, I should trust them enough to go do the thing that they need to do without micromanaging. Yeah. And I think it's all of those things. I think there's real quick. I think one of the biggest things too is selection over recruitment. We have a spot. We have this many roster spots on our team that we need to fill. We're not just looking for anybody, right? The Marine Corps' famous tagline is "the few, the proud." Right. The Army has their basic. We have our boot camp, and it's a selection. You're selecting people out as you go higher into more special forces. Obviously, the SEALs, right? Hell Week. You got BUDS, right? There are so many of these things that we can learn from the military of saying, hey, why don't we select people into our organization and not necessarily just recruit? And all the way down to teams. I think this is all really important when we get into organizations and what you can take from things like the Marine Corps.
Yeah, I do think, because a big part of the recruitment that you're talking about is also to figure out how people respond under stress and have them test that and know that before they do, right? Before they have to figure that out in the life situation, right? So that they know about what their own triggers and stress reactions are, what happens to them when they're sleep deprived and all these things. And yes, I think I come out of an industry in a space that was high paced and very volatile. And so you could say, okay, that's selection, right? I choose people who are geared towards this. Part of what I often talk about on this podcast too, though, is that we need to accept that the whole business world at large almost is volatile and certain complex and ambiguous these days. And that almost every individual in any job needs to learn better or more skills to deal and exist in and operate in an environment where there will be perpetually more uncertainty, where there will be more frequently emergent situations, etc. And yes, I think it's helpful to find out in a team if there's people who really don't do well with that and should be in positions where there's maybe less of that, or where they're not the first line of response. But saying we can select for that may no longer be true in this world, though, huh?
Yeah, true.
It becomes a bit of a luxury to say that you can select for that, because somehow I think it becomes this skill that everybody needs to deal with, whether we want to or not. Can we talk a little bit about decision making therein too? Because I think what I understand about the military systems, and it applies, for instance, also to sailing. So I used to sail with as a skipper with a boat full or yacht full of young professionals or students. There's usually alcohol involved. There was usually, and I was usually not the oldest one there, but I was in charge, right? And I would say to people, listen, anybody can steer for a bit. These are the safety rules. So you have to meet that, and these are the rules about what's okay or not. But beyond that, if you want it is that, that's all fine. But if I am clearly screaming or telling you at the top of my lungs to do this, to do that, I said, you're not arguing with me. You're doing as I ask you. And then when things have calmed down and we made it through whatever it is we were doing, then you can start the whole debate club, why my decision was wrong or why you would have done something. I said, we're not doing that in the moment because that's dangerous, right? And that's built into the way the military operates. How do you see some of that being effective in the ways of working in team dynamics in the business?
Yeah, I think well, obviously that comes down to communication. And one of the things too is expectations. I think that oftentimes, again, there are a lot of expectations set about performance, but there isn't a lot of expectations within the team about that type of stuff like hierarchy. That's what you really just described. Like in the moment, this is what I do. Like I am in charge. And I think as it's crazy to think it's been like 20 years, but but as I've progressed through my own career, I've noticed that shift even more so, where it's in the moment, people are getting a little bit more, call it what it is, chippy or argumentative. And it's like, cool, but there's a reason that this person's here in this organization for this cause. And why I started with communication is if you don't have a good structured communication system anyways, or have open forms of communication and trust, then that's where a lot of those people feel unheard. And then in the moment, they're going to establish themselves, or maybe even posture, or maybe they have a very valid concern, right? But at the end of the day, that's one of the burdens of leadership, is that if you or your team screw up, it lands on you. You are the leader. That is the burden. That is the cost. It's one of the costs, right? That we so often discount, but it's the truth. It lands on you. And thus, because the burden lands on you, there's got to be a payoff. And that means that you get to make the decisions. If there's not good trust communication, the hierarchy is just going to fall apart. Because in the moment, in the military, that would be called, well, in a lot of senses, sometimes mutiny, right? Really?
Yes. Yeah. And on a pirate ship too, right? Or a sailing ship.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in decision quality and decision making, we talk about that often, right? Because the whole earmark of a good decision is that it leads to action, but it only leads to action because people have been talked through the logic and understand why this has now been labeled the best possible decision, and that's what we're now going to do. And it leads to the result that even those who are like, okay, that's not my favorite solution, or I had personal, ideas about something else, but at least I can understand why this now floated to the top, right? And hence I can execute that. If that's a really black box, then you take away the chance for people to get there. And to get to that understanding, and that's trust eroding. And if I don't know how you make decisions in a normal day, if you're then going to tell me in the heat of the moment an order that I blindly have to follow, how am I supposed to have trust that you actually make good decisions? Because I've not ever been exposed to how you do that. Only ever been confronted with the outcome, huh? Yeah,
it's a great point.
Yeah.
It's a great point.
Well, John, I think you don't really just work with small units. I think you work with any type of organization that consists of close collaborating units.
Yeah, maybe that's a better way to put it.
Yeah, there is some really good Dutch word for they call it a co-collaborating leader. So, where what you describe is the leader still being very much with 2 feet in the organization and in the thick of it, which I think is a very normal space to be. And I'd love to at some point have you back and talk about that growth piece where we started about, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because there is this jump from being that to then the next level organization that comes with all its own challenges. But we don't have time for that today. If people want to know more about your work, about what you do, or see if they can work with you or if you can help them, where do they go? What do they do?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. And I would love to come back on if that's ever an option. This has been an awesome conversation. But people can find me if you guys are watching. It's Bellewood Coaching. So it's www.belleauwood.coach. That's probably the best place. And then I've got my LinkedIn and my Instagram. I do a lot of free videos. It's great to follow along on a lot of these topics that we're talking about. 90 seconds. They're great. I really like them. And it's just my way to give back to the community and talk about things like leadership and growth and time and discipline and balance and all those things that we all struggle with. So you can follow me there too. It's Bellewood, like I just spelled out, _coaching. Those are probably the two best places to get a good. And also I built my website. I think this is, people always ask, I built my website as a filter, not as a draw. So if you go on the website and you're like, man, I don't like this guy, you probably don't.
I think that's absolutely hilarious. Yeah. We know who we like to work with or who we don't, right? So right. It's John without an H, by the way, in case you're listening to this. John Bellewood Coaching. They will all the links and any of this information will also be in the show notes wherever you're picking up this podcast. You can go back and find that information. I'm glad you came on to talk today, John. As we started the episode, I am totally okay if you self-diagnose. I'm totally okay if you start with John instead of with me. I'd much rather have you start somewhere when you realize things are not quite as they should and invite in that fresh perspective. I think we made it very clear that whether you start with John or whether you start with me, there is somebody going to come in who look at how you're going and with care for your people will help you try and figure out how to get that unit back on track, right? And whether it's army methods or sailor methods, or it's all about decision-making under pressure. And,
absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
And leadership. So thank you for joining me, John.
Thank you so much, Maartje.
And thank you for tuning in. I hope to have you back on the next episode of the Business Emergency Room. Thank you. That's it for this episode of the Business Emergency Room. If you are currently dealing with chaos or disruption in your business, please reach out. You can email, text, or call, and I will find a way to connect with you within 24 hours. I've helped others steer out of the storm, and I know I can help you too. Talk soon. Please like, subscribe, and share.